Dr. Dennis Bielfeldt of the Christ School of Theology, bringing you a final lecture on Spinoza. Our lectures have dealt with Descartes and Spinoza in this go-around. And of course, this is all part of a course called Faith, Knowledge, and Reason, which deals with the philosophical presuppositions of theology. Now, of course, Spinoza had a great influence on later thinkers, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But he does have a very different view than his predecessor, Descartes, on the notion of freedom. And of course, freedom is always a hot topic in theology, right? How does freedom work with the doctrine of election? How is there human freedom if if nothing happens outside the sway of the divine will? Which, of course, is what Thomas Aquinas says, right? How is freedom possible if God is all-powerful and is never sitting on the sidelines, if you will? It seems like that everything that happens either happens through the permissive or active will of God. And you get into what freedom could be consistent with that. Well, we can get very deep here in a hurry. What I want to talk about is contra-causal agency. So I don't want you, when I'm talking about freedom here, I don't want you to be thinking, oh, it's nice to be an American and to be free. Forget all that stuff. We don't care about political freedom. We're just not caring. We're talking about contra-causal freedom. Could I have done other than I in fact did do? That's the question. Could I do other than what I in fact did do? And what Spinoza argues is, of course, no, I can't have done other than what I did do, because whatever I did follows from the divine nature of God, which is identical with nature. So my loves, angers, my hates, my prides, my jealousy, all these things follow inexorably from this nature. He does divide actions which are due to our nature from passions which seem to affect us. Okay? So we have, things happening outside of us that affect us, and we have things happening inside of us, if you will. You can deny contra-causal agency and then still try to say, well, sometimes there's external compulsion on me, and that seems to be different than sort of an internal compulsion. What Spinoza does is he talks about a category of the conatus, which he defines as the power in all things to preserve in being. So there's a conatus in me, there's a conatus in everything else. And so I have a certain power, I'm being affected by things outside me. Now he comes to the point, true freedom, now his true freedom is not going to be contra-causal agency. True freedom comes in the escape from being affected by that which is outside of us, and instead acting in accordance with our own nature, which is an internal compulsion, perhaps. Right? But that's freedom. The freedom is to not be affected from outside, but have the necessity determined by our own agency, which of course is a mode in God. Okay, so now he talks about virtue and happiness. Here, basically, he goes down and reworks some Stoic doctrines. If all this seems vaguely familiar, remember Stoicism taught that there is a logos coursing through all things, and that a human being, to be free, had to bring their thinking in accordance with the logos. They had to realize the necessity of the logos and be one with that necessity. Well, this is very much what Spinoza is advocating. Our virtue, he says, consists in the pursuit of knowledge and understanding, and we must rid ourselves of control by the passions. And so our highest knowledge is sort of to see everything we do and everything that is under the aspect of eternity, sub specie aeternitatis. Our highest knowledge is a purely intellectual intuition of the essence of things, the necessity of all things, right? This is beautiful. So I don't have any contra-causal agency, but I have all kinds of freedom, right? I'm free to be me, just as the triangle is free for its angles to equal to right triangles, so am I free to do all the things that I do, in fact, do. Now, this gets interesting when we get to Leibniz. Okay. Spinoza is known as an early advocate of the historical critical method. Maybe a little extreme to say that he is the architect of it. But, of course, he at all times wanted to move beyond the superstitions of what he claimed were kind of the masses' understanding of religion, right? And if you read Scripture, I mean, you could read it as a bunch of guys running after God, being superstitious and being, ruled by passion. He says, well, don't read it that way. His biblical hermeneutic is Scripture gives no natural truth, but recommends the loving of the neighbor. Oh, this sounds like theology a couple hundred years after that. The prophets were pious, moral men, having vivid imaginations, right? He did practice, I think, some type, what we might call early biblical criticism. He claimed that Moses did not write all of the Torah. And there's one quote I wanted to tell you. He claims, I hold that the method of interpreting Scripture is no different from the method of interpreting nature, and it in fact is in complete accord with it. For the method of interpreting nature consists essentially in composing a detailed study of nature from which, as being the source of our assured idea, or our assured data, we can deduce the definition of the things of nature. Now, in exactly the same way, the task of scriptural interpretation requires us to make a straightforward study of Scripture, and from this, as a source of our fixed data and principles, to deduce by logical inference the meaning of the authors of Scripture. In this way, that is, by allowing no other principles or data for the interpretation of Scripture and study of its contents, except those that can be gathered only from the Scripture itself and from a historical study of Scripture, steady progress can be made without any danger of error, and one can deal with matters that surpass our understanding with no less confidence than those matters that are known to us by the natural light of reason. All right. Well, he got into a lot of trouble with his interpretation of Scripture. What is his legacy? Well, his identity view of mind and matter continues to exert influence in a very general way today. The so-called token identity or type identity in the philosophy of mind, and the possibility of non-reductive physicalism being melded with functionalism. All of these things have intellectual precursors in Spinoza. His reduction of religion to morality, which is actually suggested here, has always, I guess, ever since that time, challenged us to think what is exactly the more in religion over and against morality. What is it that makes religion religion over and against morality? We're going to see with Kant, of course, the attempt there is reason within the realm of religion within the realm of reason alone. We certainly get a kind of a reduction of religion to morality. His commitment, Spinoza's commitment to determinism, undergirded the growth of natural science in his day, and it still is with us today. And of course, one of the big questions is the degree to which the universe is deterministic, or whether there is free play somehow at the level of the micro description of nature, and if there is this free play, whether it makes any difference at all at the macro levels. These are all questions we talk about today. And there are questions in the God theology discussion that's been happening, particularly in the last 30 years. and Spinoza is one of the resources, one of the streams from which we drink when we take certain positions in this theology science discussion. And of course, many today would deny contra-causal freedom. You know, you pick up a psychology book and it will tell you, if you're a nice freshman and reading your general psychology book, it will say you have no freedom. That, at least a lot of them will, that your will is determined by antecedent conditioning and other things. So whether or not we can have a coherent view of a human being without the category of contra-causal agency is, of course, another question. It's one that's talked about perhaps all too seldom because it's just so apparent. And oftentimes in philosophy and in science, we try to solve the easy questions instead of getting to the hard ones. We figure maybe if we solve the easy ones, we'll get after the hard ones, and I'm not sure that's always right. This is Dr. Dennis Bielfeldt, President of the Christ School of Theology. Thank you for coming today and being part of these lectures, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.